Now for our story. This morning, Aunt Mary had encountered Miss Thorndyke, the young woman who was caring for Ben's grandson, wheeling the baby boy slowly down the street in his pram. Aunt Mary had introduced herself, and the two women had chatted casually for some minutes. Miss Thorndyke, who lived such a confined life in the nursery of Ben's house, was grateful for the opportunity to talk about the baby. When Aunt Mary mentioned that the child looked familiar somehow, she was as interested as if she were the baby's own mother. Now she looks up quickly as Aunt Mary says,
Yes, that's it. This baby's eyes are just like Lisa Fenner.
Mrs. Fenner? Or is she a friend of yours, too?
Why, yes. As I say, she stayed with us several days not long ago.
I remember her very well. She stopped in to see Mrs. Meade, and I said to
You mean Mrs. Fenner visited Mrs. Meade recently?
Yes, just for an afternoon. But we had a nice little talk when she came out on the terrace to see the baby. She seemed to be so interested in him. I think she almost hated to leave. Come to think of it, I believe she said she was taking the train that same day. But if she's been visiting you...
Well, she's gone on to Chicago now.
Oh, I see. I guess you'll find that quite a change from California.
California?
Why, yes, I believe that's where she met Mrs. Meade.
Oh, I didn't know that. Oh, look. The baby's dropped off to sleep while we've been talking.
I know. Nothing bothers him. In fact, the only time he ever seems to be the least bit cranky is when Mrs. Meade comes into the nursery. She's... Oh, that must sound rather strange to you, Mrs. Lane. What I mean is he isn't as used to his mother as he is to me, and I think her nervousness puts him on edge, too.
Probably it does. Babies are quick to respond to people's moods. Tension.
Goodness, I'm afraid I've practically talked your arm off.
Oh, no.
I don't see very many people. Sometimes days go by, and the only person I talk to almost is the baby. He's a lot of company, but even so...
Oh, of course, my dear. It's only natural you need a little companionship, being in a strange town.
Yes, that's it, partly. I've met so few people. And then, well, the Calvert home is beautiful and everything, but it has such an empty feeling somehow. Some days I get so depressed I can hardly bear it.
Oh, that's too bad.
Anyway, Mrs. Lane, it's been nice talking to you. You didn't seem like a stranger to me after hearing Mr. Meade sing your praises. I guess you know how fond he is of you.
Well, Bill and I are very good friends. I have a lot of respect for him, too.
He does seem to be a fine young man. I've often thought what a shame it is things have to be the way they are. It's too bad when they're children, and Mr. Meade simply adores the baby.
Oh, I know he does. Well, Miss Thorndyke, you never can tell. Perhaps in the long run, everything will come out all right.
Oh, I do hope so. I'd hate to think this youngster wasn't going to have a normal, happy childhood.
It's a pity for any child not to have. Well, let's hope for the best, shall we? You and I?
Yes, Mrs. Lane.
Well, I'm afraid I better be getting along. Lefty will be worried if I don't meet him right on the dot. I've a rather exaggerated reputation for being prompt. As a result, if I'm a few minutes late, the family always imagines that something dreadful must have happened to delay me.
Well, you can tell him the dreadful thing this time was that you met an awfully talkative young woman who wouldn't let you go.
No, I'll tell him nothing of the sort. Perhaps we can arrange for you to come out to the farm some evening. I'd like you to meet my niece, Peggy, and the rest of the family.
Well, that's awfully thoughtful of you, Mrs. Lane.
All right, we'll see what we can do about it soon.
I'd love to. Well, goodbye, Mrs. Lane, and thanks.
Goodbye, my dear.
As Aunt Mary drove back to the square, she reviewed her conversation with Miss Thorndyke. From the things the young woman had left unsaid, Aunt Mary thought baby son. She thought, too, of the curious fact that although Lisa Fenner had visited Kitt Meade while she was in Wakefield, she had later refused to tell anything of her connection with Ben Calvert's daughter. Meanwhile, Miss Thorndyke returned home, put the baby into his crib in the nursery, and went into the sitting room across the hall. A few minutes later, Kitt entered.
Well, Miss Thorndyke, I see you got home with the baby finally.
Yes, we went for a little walk. I like to get a little exercise in the morning, and the baby loves being out.
I'm afraid you didn't get much exercise this morning, did you?
I don't know what you mean, Mrs. Meade.
Of course, you were talking a blue streak. I suppose that is exercise in a way.
Mrs. Meade, apparently I've done something to displease you. If I have, I wish you'd tell me what it is.
On my way home a few minutes ago, I passed you standing on the street talking to Aunt Mary. I drove right past you, but you were so busy chattering you didn't even see me.
I talked to Mrs. Lane, yes. I was going along, and she introduced herself. She stopped to chat for a few minutes. I can't see anything wrong in it.
Perhaps there are a lot of things you don't see, Miss Thorndyke. Or maybe you just don't want to. I thought I'd made it plain to you before that I don't like your constantly getting into lengthy conversations with anyone you happen to meet.
I don't know what you're talking about, Mrs. Mead. Constantly. It's really quite funny when I think of it. This is the first time I've said more than 2 words to anyone for weeks.
It was the same thing when Mrs. Fenner was here that afternoon. You two were out there on the terrace just as cozy as anything. I'm sure I don't see what you find to talk about with these people, but whatever it is, I don't like it.
Mrs. Lane took the trouble to be friendly to me for one thing. Friendliness is something I'd almost forgotten about since I've been here, Mrs. Mead.
Friendly? I'll bet she was friendly. She probably wanted to find out anything she could about what goes on in this house. So she took the opportunity to butter you up in order to pump you. And what did she say? What did she ask you?
Why, nothing in particular. We talked about the baby.
The baby?
Naturally. You ought to know, Mrs. Mead, that's the first thing any normal woman does talk about when she sees a child out for an airing.
So you talked about the baby. I suppose she asked a lot of questions? I should think you'd have sense enough to know, with the situation what it is in this town, my divorce coming up and so forth, that I wouldn't want you going around gossiping about me, the baby, or anything else.
I'm sure nothing I said would endanger you in any way, Mrs. Mead.
You can't be sure. You don't know. Oh, what's the use? It's done now.
I think you're making a mountain out of a molehill, Mrs. Mead. Besides, how can you expect me to know which people it's all right to talk to? Which people are your friends and which are your enemies? Since you seem to think you have some.
The best thing for you to do is just to assume they're all my enemies. That'll be close enough.
I'm sorry you feel that way, Mrs. Mead. I'm aware that you've been under a great strain with everything that's been happening. But I can't help thinking if you'd approach people with less of a chip on your shoulder...
Look, Miss Thorndyke, Dad hired you to take care of the child. You seem to be doing an adequate job. I suggest that you limit your activities to the nursery. Certainly, I've no intention of standing around while you hand out a bit of homely philosophy.
Very well, Mrs. Mead. If you prefer that I leave...
Oh, don't be silly. I simply mean that if you'll stick to your own knitting, you'll be better off. I can take care of my problems very nicely without any help from you. However, this I insist on. Don't go around talking to every Tom, Dick, and Harry you happen to run into, either in this house or in Wakefield. Is that clear?
Oh, rather rude, nasty, mean-tempered. If it weren't for that baby, I'd just pack up and leave tonight. What's she worried about anyway? She made the same fuss when Mrs. Fenner came that day, raised the roof. Just because I talked to that poor girl for a few minutes. Better stay out there with the baby. And now Mrs. Lane. Oh, it doesn't make sense. Not as if she cared about the child, really. She doesn't. And why is she so jumpy about him? About people seeing him, talking about him? What does she think they'll find out? I suppose it's a dreadful thing to say, but I can't help wishing they'd award the baby to Mr. Mead when the trial comes up.
Well, Miss Thorndyke, after the way Kitt Mead has behaved, you're quite right to wonder what her reasons are. And if only you knew it, the answers are all within your grasp. If you could find the solution, you might be of great help to many people affected by Kitt Mead's claiming Lisa Fenner's child as her own. Now for our story. It was just before closing time at David Bowman's bank, the Wakefield Trust and Saving. In David's little fenced-in enclosure to the right of the entrance, he was talking to one of his favorite clients, Aunt Mary Lane. The two old friends had concluded their business a minute ago. Now, as David gathers up the papers on his desk into a neat little pile, he looks across to Aunt Mary.
You know, Mary, these little chats we have here at the bank are better than nothing. But I'd like to have more time to talk things over. Why don't you and Randy and Peggy come in and have dinner at the house some night this week, We could have a nice long evening and really catch up on things.
Well, that'd be fine, David. We'd love to. You just name the date.
Good. I'll phone you tomorrow morning to make it definite. After years of being looked after by Sarah, I finally got it drummed into me not to invite people to dinner without giving her fair warning.
I know what she means. There's nothing a woman hates as much as having to get up a meal for company at the last minute. Although Sarah oughtn't to consider us company.
Well...
She always treats us when we come as if we were visiting royalty.
I suppose it would be useless to invite Lefty. Although there's nothing I'd like better than to have him come along.
Oh, I know that, David.
You know, I ran into him at the seed store the other day. Did he mention it?
No, he didn't.
Well, I'm not surprised. He kept mumbling something about ladies in floppy pink hats, society dudes, armchair gardeners. I gathered he was casting some strong doubts as to my ability for raising flowers.
Oh, yes. I think I know now what he was getting at. It seems Peggy's been egging him on to take part in the flower show this year.
Oh, so that's it.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I only hope he does.
Of course, he insists he won't. But I think he'll change his mind. Whether you know it or not, you're going to be up against some stiff competition with Lefty on your delphinium this year. He's been making great plans.
Well, fine. Nothing I like better than a good, clean fight. Even if winning only means another blue ribbon to show off at my greenhouse. Yeah, that Lefty. I really miss him. And I've a good idea he misses me, too. But he's gone on this way so long, he hates to give in.
I accused him of that this morning, and he practically admitted he's forgotten what the original difficulty was.
Well, that's a good sign.
So I wouldn't worry about it, David. I think Lefty will come around one of these days.
Well, I hope so. He left quite a gap in my life. You know how I am, Mary. I don't make friends very easily. And, of course, as far as relatives go, I might as well be on a desert island.
It's too bad, David.
Take my niece Kitt, for instance. The only time I see that girl is when she comes into the bank here. And then she usually goes shooting past, tries to pretend she doesn't see me.
Poor Kitt. I feel sorry for her. When I saw her the other day, it really shocked me. She looked ill, so thin, nervous.
Yeah, I know. It's been getting worse all the time. And I still don't understand what's happened to her. How a girl with Kitt's intelligence could let herself be bamboozled by Ben the way she has lately.
It is odd, isn't it?
I've had the feeling all along that it was Ben's idea for her to put up a fight with Bill about this divorce.
Oh, I don't doubt it for a minute. However, thank goodness she's finally changed her mind about it. A few more days at most, and that part of it will be settled.
Yes. You know, Mary, there's something going on in that girl's head. I only wish I knew what. It mystifies me.
What makes you say that, David?
Well, she came in to see me the other day. I guess it was the day you saw her for a minute.
Oh, yeah?
Now, the fact that she came in purposely to talk to me was surprising enough in itself. As I said, she usually avoids me. But this day, she did want to talk things over. And the gist of it was, she asked me to intervene with Bill. Try to persuade him not to attempt getting custody of the baby. I suppose it's a strange thing for me to say about my own niece, but I honestly don't think Kitt cares about that child of hers. In fact, she's as much as told me so several times.
Yes, I remember. I think she said something of the sort to Bill, too.
She did. And yet, she sounded very genuine the day I talked to her about it. Genuine and desperate somehow. Almost frantic. That's what puzzled me so.
It's very peculiar. It doesn't seem to tie in.
Well, I doubt if we'll ever know the real answer.
I don't know about that, David. I rather think we will.
Well, Mr. Bowman, I've got those papers ready for you to sign. Oh, well, hello, Aunt Mary.
Oh, hello, Bill.
Excuse me for busting in like this. To tell you the truth, I was so preoccupied, I didn't notice Mr. Bowman was busy.
Oh, that's all right, Bill. Here, I'll take a look at him in a minute.
Oh, you go right ahead, David. I must be running along anyhow.
All right, Mary, if you must. And I'll get in touch with you about your dinner party.
Fine, David. Goodbye.
I'll see you to the door, Aunt Mary. I believe you're locked in.
Why, is the bank closed? Thank goodness, I had no idea what time it was. What's a 3:15?
Yep. Well, this is the time we really begin to knuckle down, after the doors are closed for the day.
I guess you're working pretty hard, aren't you, Bill?
Oh, sure. But it doesn't hurt me.
Work never does. In fact, it seems to agree with you. You're looking very fit.
Well, that's nice to know. I think it's partly knowing that it won't be long now before this divorce business will be taken care of.
Oh, that's right. Tomorrow's the day, isn't it?
Yep, it starts tomorrow.
By the way, I saw that son and heir of yours this morning.
Oh, you did? How was he, Aunt Mary?
Oh, he was fine. Where'd you see him?
Well, I was on 11th Street near the Calverts.
and I saw this Miss Thorndyke taking him for a little airing. I stopped, and we chatted for a while. She seems to be a very nice young woman.
Yeah, I have a lot of confidence in her.
She's certainly fond of that baby.
I know. It makes me feel a lot better, too, knowing she's taking such good care of him. Tell me something. Is this just fatherly pride, or is he a particularly good-looking baby the way I think he is?
He's a particularly good-looking baby.
Well, thanks, Aunt Mary. I was hoping I wasn't prejudiced or something. Of course, he doesn't look a bit like me, but that's all in his favor as far as I'm concerned.
Well, as he gets older, he may take on more of a resemblance. But at present, I'm inclined to think you're right. He doesn't seem to look like either side.
I know. Well, to tell the truth, I'm not worried about his looking like anybody in particular. As for growing up to be like somebody, that's something else again. But I do want him to have a break. And I'm almost sure... Well, anyway, thank goodness for Miss Thorndyke.
Yes. You know, Bill, she has a lot of respect for you.
I don't know why. I haven't been much of a father so far.
I think that young woman understands a great deal more than she says. She takes in a lot and draws her own conclusions.
Yeah, I guess you're right. That's the impression I've had when I talked to her a couple of times.
This may be jumping at conclusions, but I had a definite feeling she was very sympathetic to your side of the story. And it's just possible she might prove very helpful to you, if it comes right down to it.
You mean when the case comes up in court?
It's something to think about.
I don't know, Aunt Mary. It's possible, but... Well, after all, Miss Thorndyke has her job to think of. And she is working for Ben Calvert. Her job wouldn't last 10 minutes if she decided to take any stand openly.
No, probably wouldn't. But it strikes me as she is the sort of girl who has a strong sense of justice.
Yeah. And, of course, the fact that she's so fond of the kid and wants him to get the breaks. And when I talked to her in the square one day, she got quite intense about it. Almost as if she were talking about a child of her own.
Well, that's probably very much how she feels. Maybe she's trying to give your baby the affection she thinks it lacks from its own mother.
I think you're right, Aunt Mary. She didn't come right out with it, but she implied when I talked to her that the baby didn't get any affection from Kitt. But even so, as for acting on any such knowledge she might have, and even if she did, I question how much good it would do.
Well, Bill, you know, I wish you all the luck in the world tomorrow.
Thanks, Aunt Mary. Yeah, but I'm afraid there's not much hope.
Not much hope, Bill? You say that with such dejection. And yet today the answers to your whole problem have been unknowingly stated. Kitt's desperation to keep a child she evidently doesn't want, and that child's resemblance to Lisa Fenner, a woman you have never met. If only the link between these factors could be made, in time. What evidence will Judge Willoughby hear presented when this case comes before him?
Now for our story. Tonight, Dell Shipley's apartment above her nightclub, the Golden Peacock, was lit only by a solitary lamp in a far corner of the room. It was very quiet. The club was closed now, for it was after 2 o'clock, and the entertainers and staff were dressing to leave. Dell had come up to the peace and quiet of her own quarters not long before. Now, having changed from her smart gown into a loose-fitting negligee, she is sitting in a low easy chair with her head resting on the back, her eyes closed.
Oh, gosh, it's good to just let go and relax. Wish I had the sense to get out of this racket and take it easy. But if I did, I wouldn't know what to do with myself. I'm not like Aunt Mary, able to keep busy doing things for other people, running a house. Mary sounded real worried when I talked to her the other day. She sure got that kid Lisa on her mind. I wonder what bothers that girl. Well, guess I'll have to talk to her. I promised Mary I would. But I sure hate to mix up in it. Especially after what Lily said. She did her best, and all she got was a fast brush off. Oh, Lord. For 2 cents, I wouldn't answer. Oh, come in, Lisa. Hello, hon. I'm glad to see you.
Oh, I know it's awfully late.
Oh, forget it. I've just been sitting here feeling kind of sorry for myself. In another minute, I'd have been crying into a beer.
I know what you mean. Sometimes I sit alone for hours just thinking. When Lily catches me, she always tells me to snap out of it.
Lily doesn't go in for daydreaming much herself. At least she'd have you to believe that. But I don't know. I keep this grin on my puss all night for the customers. It's nice to look gloomy if I want to, when I'm alone. Well, hon, how's the world been treating you? We haven't seen much of each other lately.
No, we haven't. That's why I wanted to talk to you tonight. I've got something I want to tell you.
You have? Well, that's what I'm here for. Everyone treating you all right at the club, I hope?
Oh, yes, that's not it.
Good. I always like to know if there are any beefs so we can get them ironed out.
It is about the job, though, Mrs. Shipley.
Don't call me Mrs. Shipley, hon. You make me feel like an old lady.
All right, Dell. What I wanted to say is I've decided to leave.
Oh? What for?
Well, I'm not doing a good job. I'm ruining the whole show.
Now, take it easy,
No,
hon.
really. I know you're willing to keep me on for Aunt Mary's sake, but I don't want you to do that. It's not fair.
What do you mean it's not fair?
I mean, you'll just lose business that way, and I don't want that to happen. If I go away, you can get somebody else who'll do you some good.
Now, listen, kid. There's not a thing in the world wrong with your act. You're attractive and a good dancer, and there's no reason why you shouldn't go over big, if you'd half try. But the trouble with you is you haven't got your heart in it.
I guess maybe that's right, Dell. But I don't, and there's nothing I can do about it, I'm afraid. You see, I haven't got a heart to put in my work anymore.
Mm-hmm. You got a broken heart, so you're just going to let your work go to the dickens. And then what? You're going to sit around feeling sorry for yourself and gradually wind up by falling to pieces completely? That doesn't make sense.
Oh, I know it doesn't, but...
Look, Lisa, I know a little about what's eating you. I might as well admit. Lily and I have talked it over a couple of times. We had to, because we were worried about you. You wouldn't guess it, but Lily's the kind of a girl who can't stand to see anyone falling apart without trying to stick them together again. And in my own way, I guess I'm almost as bad. In a way, I've got the general idea that you're unhappy about this split-up with your husband.
Yes, that's part of it.
Well, I know how you feel. But you can't let things like that get you down, hon. You've got to fight, or you go under.
I've tried to fight, Dell. But I guess I've just given up. I'm tired.
Listen, kid. I felt that way once. My husband's ship got sick. Well, it was worse than that. He lost touch with the everyday world, if you know what I mean. They had to put him in a mental hospital.
Oh, Dell.
I'm not trying to give you the sad story of my life, kid. All I want to say is I know what it is to have things go wrong. You feel you can't keep on. All you want is to crawl off in a dark corner and be let alone.
Yes, that's it. Not to think.
But you see, hon, it's no good that way. You have to keep going. If you give in, you're a gone goose.
Oh, I don't know. Sometimes it seems to me people reach a point where they haven't the strength to care anymore.
You can get over anything if you really want to.
I wonder if you can.
Sure you can. I know what I'm talking about.
But if it's your own fault that things are the way they are, and yet there's nothing you can do about it.
Who says there's nothing you can do about it? There's always a way to make things right.
Oh, no, there isn't. Not for me.
I don't believe it.
What's true? There's no way for me to retrace, go back.
You know, Lisa, it makes me pretty sore seeing someone just give up the ghost. If that's the way you feel, I guess I ought to keep my sticky little fingers out of this thing. That's what I wanted to do, but I can't.
Dell, I just wanted to tell you I was leaving, that's all. I don't want to put you in a spot just because Aunt Mary thrust me on you.
Aunt Mary. Yeah, I was thinking of her, too. Look, Lisa, if you want to clear out of here, go someplace else, it's okay by me. But first, I want to tell you a few things. Something's eating you. I've realized that since you first arrived. It's something you don't want to talk about either.
I can't talk about it.
All right, you can't talk about it. But you see, that's the whole trouble. You've probably built up some simple little thing in your mind until it looks like it's impossible to do anything about it. Now, I don't want to pry into your affairs. I'm not curious, Lord knows. I've seen and heard enough about life to hold me for as long as I go on ticking. But for your own good, I think you should get it off your chest. Let someone who isn't in the middle of it give you their slant on it.
I wish I dared do that, but I'm afraid to. Really, I am, Dell. You see, I'm sure about one thing. I haven't exaggerated the importance of it, not a bit.
Well, maybe you haven't. Whether you have or not, it'd still be a good idea to find out how someone else feels about it.
But it's asking so much of anyone to keep such a thing secret.
Look, hon, you don't know me very well, I grant you. But you do know Aunt Mary.
Yes, I know Aunt Mary, and that's just it. She knows.
She knows what?
Oh, nothing. Nothing. I was just thinking.
Well, what I'm saying is, can you imagine Aunt Mary being friends with someone she couldn't trust?
Oh, no, of course not.
Okay, then, I'm a friend of Aunt Mary's. And she trusts me. That ought to be enough of a recommendation. Besides, if I told all the secrets I've heard in my life, well, no thanks. I learned to keep my mouth shut when I was a lot younger than you are. And I've never forgotten. Now, why don't you tell me what this is all about? Maybe we can dope it out together. It's worth a try, isn't it?
Maybe you're right, Dell. Maybe that's what I should do.
Now we're getting somewhere.
Oh, but Dell.
Yeah, hon?
You'll promise to keep it a secret. Not to tell a single person.
Yeah, Lisa. I promise.
And so Dell Shipley, in spite of Lily Devon's warning that it would accomplish nothing, and her own inclination to avoid mixing in other people's affairs, finally gave in to Aunt Mary's urgent appeal, persuaded Lisa Fenner to confess what it is which weighs so heavily on her conscience. Will Lisa tell her the whole truth, that she relinquished her baby son to Kitt Meade? And if she does, will Dell be able to help Lisa after giving her solemn promise to keep the information a secret?